Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It is 3:30 p.m. and this is the Public Safety Planning, Human Services and Personnel Committee meeting on September 12th, 2023 at 3:30. I am the chair, Vivian Olson. With me is Councilmember Jenna Nand, who's a committee member, and our ex officio member, the council president, Neil Tibbet, is also here, as is Diane Butchness. And thanks to our staff, Scott Passy, for running the meeting. So I do not think we have any changes to the agenda. So we will move on with committee business. Item number 1, which is the committee updates. Do we have anybody from staff here who wanted to speak to that? I have the update from an email from from Director McLaughlin if she's not present.
I see Leaf is there. I wonder if he has an update on the scoping. There's
Susan.
I am aware that Director McLaughlin will be attending, and here she is. She might be able to speak to that.
Okay, great. Director McLaughlin, I was just going to share with the public, or have you share what you had told us in that September 6th email about where we are on the scoping for the comp plan.
Oh, we're under contract for the comprehensive plan based on the scope of work council approved a month ago or so.
Yes, and regarding the scoping meetings, that was what the update had been. Do you want me to read what was in that September 6th email? That we're not through the initial phase of scoping,
oh,
and
thanks.
then the
yeah, if you yep, that was meant to be the update. So if you want to read it, that's great. Otherwise, I can pull it up.
Okay, I can read it. We're not through the initial phase of the scoping for the comp plan outreach, and when you are, the consultant will organize the additional scoping meetings that you've been out, not yet briefed on the feedback, and that you need time to digest and synthesize. We've gotten the feedbacks from the residents that it was a little open-ended, and just kind of asking, what should we look at in any of those categories versus what is in the last comp plan, and how to tweak to represent the new vision statement. Those were sort of the parts of what was prompting the update, was having gotten feedback that maybe having a little bit more targeting on what it was that we were looking for the residents to say on anything might be helpful to us getting more valid feedback on that. Okay. That was our one and only thing. So item 2 is the Title 19 Building and Fire Code updates. And that would be Leif as well. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Leif Bjorbak, building official. I imagine I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen and start my presentation. So as you know, every 3 years, give or take, the building codes get updated, and they start at the national level where they're published, and then the state of Washington reviews them, makes amendments to them, and gets them approved by the state legislature. I'm showing you a bunch of the different types of codes that are there now. And pardon me if I'm a little clunky on the technology here. But anyway, here's a list of the family of building codes that we administer. And this is just the building department for the most part, fire department as well for the fire code. But this is over and above the land use code that the planning department administers. So, and you've seen the updates to Title 19, which is where the ordinance resides, which adopts all these codes. So the building code is kind of our bread and butter code. It's our commercial building code. And some examples on how that gets updated at the national level. So the actual base code that gets published has changes every cycle, every edition, if you will. And this is just a list of some examples of those types of changes that everybody gets. Puzzle rooms you may also know as escape rooms. And those have a very specific need for egress, for exiting, for emergencies and that. So that's one example of how the base code is being updated, along with those for mass timber, some accessibility changes. The concrete design is a structural update, and so that's just kind of there as a sample of the structural type of advances that the code makes. And one of the bullets there states that EV charging is now required in most occupancies. That has been working its way into the code over the last couple code cycles. And now an interesting one that there's some structural provisions for shipping containers that are proposed to be used as buildings. Previously, there were no recognized standards.
My council member.
Excuse me?
Apologies, I thought I was on mute.
So while we're in the commercial building code, or IBC, and I'll explain it, it's actually formally and most formally known as the Washington State Building Code, but we use the term IBC, very freely. So if I say IBC, I mean, the Washington State Building Code as adopted at the state level. So I'm going to propose to the council the potential adoption of 3 optional appendices. One is in the IBC, or commercial code, and Appendix P, as you see there, it's not mandatory unless adopted by cities, and so that's why I'm making the point of this, to highlight it for you folks. You see the purpose and the application there on the bullet points, but this appendix and the other 2 as well align with the climate action plan. And so we're hoping that you find this amenable, and once this appendix is adopted, it will become a requirement for construction projects. So moving to the residential code, or IRC, you can see some of the new requirements there. And this again is just a sampling of how the base code changes. And then if I have noted here the state amendment to the IRC, that's an amendment that's made at the state level, and then the city has its own amendments, which are just basically to facilitate our permit applications and other more minor specific items that are particular or peculiar to the city of Edmonds. Here's the second of our optional appendix. And this is for solar ready provisions. And so unless it's adopted by the city in ordinance form, then it's not a requirement in the city of Edmonds. It's very subtle to find this actual insertion into Title 19, unless you know what you're looking for. But when you're looking at the Title 19 language where it says the IBC or the IRC is hereby adopted along with Appendix X, Y, or Z, that's where you'd find this Appendix T in the list. And so just by adding the letter T to that list, means that the city does adopt this and it is enforceable. So Appendix Y in the IRC is more or less identical to that in the IBC for construction and demolition material management. And as I mentioned, all three of these appendices, align with the CAP. And you'll notice that these bullets for where it applies to and the requirements are nearly identical between the commercial and the residential codes. So speaking to the Title 19 itself, that's where all of these separate codes are adopted. And in normal years, in normal code cycles, all we would have to do is update the edition of the year from 2018 to 2021 for each of the codes. This time around, there's a little bit more to it. We just spoke about the optional appendices. And then we got a brand new code that we're going to talk about later on in the presentation. Some of the optional things that we propose adjusting are the permit timelines, excuse me, for how long an application is good for and how long a building permit is good for. And you'll notice that the timelines for applications aren't quite as long as for permits. Normally the application process is shorter than it takes to actually construct the project under the building permit. And then invariably, we've got minor amendments for cleaning up old language and providing clarifications in the code. The residential code is in 1905. One of the changes that's been made to that code is that at the city level is that the calculation for fire area for the sake of fire sprinklers, that's the FS there, now includes the garage. So whereas the threshold for size of a home was at 3,000 square feet before you needed sprinklers, now that 3,000 square feet includes the garage. And so fire sprinklers will be required in slightly smaller homes going forward. And then 1925, the fire code, fairly recently, it happened that the fire standards that were used at the South County Fire became no longer available. And so we've had to codify those standards just to maintain our regulation of construction elements such as fire access roads and fire hydrants, fire sprinklers. So you'll see quite a bit of redlining in the strikeout version of Title 19. And so that's kind of the reasoning behind those extensive changes. We're still in conversation about a few of those in our department. So there may be some tweaking to those sections between now and the next time you see this at council. Okay, we're going to jump to the energy code a little bit. And so I'm sure all of you know that the state has mandated a 70% reduction in annual net energy consumption. And so we're kind of on the timeline in the middle of that graph there, and we're making gains. And so in short, I'll just say that every code cycle, the energy code just gets that much more stringent. So we're still in the energy code. There's a residential energy code and a commercial energy code. So I'll just make that little distinction. And you see on the bullets the different types of components for a home that the energy code regulates. And almost an identical list of elements in the commercial energy code. However, they play out, a bit different, in the more advanced systems that you find in commercial buildings. One example in the energy code for commercial is that whereas it was optional previous to install a solar-ready facility, now this time around, the solar readiness is a requirement. There's some exceptions to that if you find yourself fully shaded, or maybe some other exceptions, but for the most part, this is allowing buildings to be ready for for installation of solar systems in the future. Here's the new code, the Wildland Urban Interface Code, and I'll just share that it's also known quite widely as the WUI code. So it sounds kind of goofy, but it's a thing. And the WUI code is adopted by the state, which means that it's mandated, it's required that the city also adopt it. So it's not optional for us. And the purpose is to reduce the risk of fire spreading to, or wildland fire spreading to structures, and the other way around. So you see some of the fire resistive elements that go into construction going forward. And it will impact the way the landscape is managed on new homes or for additions. Our department is in discussion as to whether there might be, some impacts and potential conflicts with critical areas code. There are so many variables in this new WUI code that it's going to take a high level of analysis to flesh out what those impacts might be. But there may be some considerations needed, for the development or for the updates to the tree code, for example. But we are working through that as a staff. Looking at the map there, the gray areas are outside of the WUI zone areas, and the orange areas are the impacted neighborhoods and parcels. So we are scrambling a bit, just like everybody else in the state, to manage this new code. But between now and when the codes take effect, we anticipate getting in place, submittal requirements and staff up to speed to be able to review and enforce this code along with the rest of the codes.
Leif, I hadn't asked you if you wanted to entertain questions during your presentation or have us wait till the end.
I believe I've got this, and then I'll be at the question slide. So maybe if I can finish this, we're just about there, but appreciate the question.
Great.
And this timeline is just pointing towards October 29th, which is the date that these codes become effect, and that's statewide. And so we're just falling in line as a city with what the state has already established. And so here we are at the question slide. I did receive questions from Councilmember Olson. Thank you. Haven't had time to respond in writing. I can field some of those verbally if you like at this time.
Sure. I think that you explained in the presentation that there's a difference between application life and permit life. And
yeah,
that was probably addressing 2 or 3 of my questions. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, sure. If you wanted to dig into those others, that would be wonderful.
A couple of them I might defer. Some of them look like some wordsmithing or reordering of items, in the formatting.
Yeah, you don't have to. I guess that's just was me just saying, did you want to look at that? And you don't need to address it, just for your information if it was helpful.
Sure. No, and they are helpful. I see merit in considering some of those. So thank you for that. And as far as I think maybe the one element that the issue that I didn't address yet was, or in detail, was the reason why we are proposing to extend timelines for applications and building permits. We're finding that the industry is changing a little bit, and it's getting harder to through the process quickly. And it's not necessarily on the city's end, but the industry, we hear of developers having a hard time finding designers, and designers that have designers such as architects, engineers, and geotechs and that type of thing. And they may not be available, that may be harder to find. And even those that are retained may not have the availability to turn around comment letters when we have corrections that need to be made during the review process. So that's one of the reasons that we're finding, as well as funding. We've had projects that have lost funding, but then thankfully found other lenders. But in several instances, that has been the case, that has extended the need for application life. Yeah.
I think I had also asked it just about the hearing. Is this the type of thing where there's value to having one of those, or is this, not, in your opinion, or not required also?
I don't believe it's required. This has traditionally been a code update that I have presented to council every 3 years, and predecessors before me without a hearing. And so I believe it's just straight council approval. There are some other surrounding efforts. The update for Title 19 is undergoing the SEPA process, and so that's going to be resolved soon. But that's kind of outside the council's purview. And some of these, especially the city adoption of residential appendices, will need the review of the State Building Code Council in order to take effect. So, and the way that works is the council will approve, the title, the ordinance, basically, and then the state will take a look, and I just see no reason why they wouldn't approve what we're proposing. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Nan, did you have anything before I go to Councilmember Butchness?
Yes, I do have a few questions. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Bjorbak.
Bjorbak, yes.
Bjorbak. Glad I got that correct. I apologize, I couldn't send you my questions ahead of time. I just got back from Chicago, so catching up. But I did have a few questions in regards to the environmental climate change resiliency sort of aspect of some of these updates. So as I'm sure you're aware, in 2021, hundreds of people died in Washington state during a heat dome. A large portion of that were senior citizens and other vulnerable people who were in housing without air conditioning, which is still, from my understanding, not very common in Washington state, despite the fact that we're now commonly seeing temperatures over 90 degrees and even 100 degrees in some parts of the state. Is there anything in the new code updates to address cooling elements that could be incorporated into building design as a part of the permit process?
Not that we're considering at the moment. Yeah, so I think I see where you're going, and the building code itself, does not dictate those type of considerations. So at the moment, it's up to the designer or the owner of the project to incorporate those for the needs of their occupants.
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit too, Councilmember Nan. This is an issue, again, it's exactly what Mr. Bjorbeck mentioned, in the sense that it really is a financial decision of the property owner. However, our new building codes are stringent enough that it actually results in very energy efficient buildings, which ultimately should hope that they stay a little bit cooler and a little bit warmer, obviously, in the winter. So they have that going for it. But we have talked with affordable housing developers about this issue, about cooling the older buildings and opportunities to do that. And so we are looking to see how we can fill that gap, but that would be mostly through grants and incentives as opposed to the building code updates.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's just now we're starting to see, I think, that building design and the permitting process, there is an aspect due to extreme weather events and extreme temperatures of public safety and public health that hopefully we can start to see incorporated into building designs, and anything that we can do to incentivize that through the city's part in that process, I think would be beneficial for the community. I was wondering, so I also sit on the board of SNOCOM 9/11, which is designing a new facility, and they are they're foregoing LEED certification because they don't want to pay for it. But they said that their minimum standards would reach LEED Silver anyway. And how would you compare the kind of the basic floor of what we're requiring of developers to the LEED standards? Are we kind of getting there without having to have developers go or builders go through the LEED certification process in terms of what we're requiring from them in green building?
Leif, do you want to answer that? I'm happy to take that one.
No, please do.
So we recently held, thanks to Leif and his team, held a green building forum at the Waterfront Center. And that was twofold. One, to kind of socialize our Title 19 updates, and two, to really inform our development of the Green Building Incentive Program. We brought in the Built Green administrator through Master Builders, as well as local jurisdictions, Shoreline and Kirkland. And we had an interesting discussion. Built Green, they suspect, and again, this is anecdotal, and we would have to, we had to fact check this, but they suspect that LEED, because it's a national standard, is likely competing with the Washington State Title 19 updates, at least from the energy code perspective. Washington State has stringent energy codes, but there's other areas of improvement that are relevant in LEED, such as waste diversion and things like this, where we still have a lot to improve upon. And so there's not one clear answer, Councilmember Nand, but I will say that as a LEED certified, LEED accredited professional, that the movement has come so far in decades. I've been accredited for 2 decades now. So they continue to update the LEED point rating system, obviously to continue its relevance in the market. And the resultant gain has been tremendous in terms of the private industry wanting to get LEED certified solely for the marketability of it, right? And so it's twofold. It's one, LEED is continuing to stay relevant because it's their brand, right? And two, it's really driving the market in terms of outcomes. And so it's a win-win.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that explanation, Director McLaughlin. And then I did have a question, I think partially that relates to 19.070050 and habitat assessment. And it just basically generally relates to what's the consideration or update for impermeable surface, stormwater, open space as a tactic to try to reduce some of the flooding and some of the habitat destruction that we see as we are looking at more and more human encroachment into our natural urban forest environment.
Leif, do you recognize that reference? Do you want to go to that slide perhaps?
It's not one of my, well, I can go to that, yes. Let's.
It says 19.07.050 habitat assessment, and then 19.07.065 changes to special flood hazard areas. And I fully acknowledge that I'm a neophyte compared to you guys on this. So your explanations will be very helpful because we're facing a lot of stormwater issues now in the city of Edmonds and also concerns about losing open space and habitat destruction.
Forgive me if I get the wrong thing here. Oh, that's not it.
I'll keep you honest that you're sharing your file folders. Or I'll keep you transparent, let you know how transparent you're being, I should say.
Yeah. And forgive me for not sending you these references ahead of time. I'm just getting back from Chicago and trying to get back into council mindset.
Leif, if you want, you can always stop sharing and then start sharing again if that helps.
Yep, I will try that.
While Leif's busy looking for that, why don't I have the next person ask questions, because perhaps Director McLaughlin will be able to answer those while we go.
I do have a few more questions and comments, but I'm happy to yield the floor.
That's okay, Jenna. Go ahead and continue. And Director McLaughlin will look for those while.
Okay, so then just my few wrap-up comments. I'm very happy to see that EV compatibility is being required for new construction. I was an early adopter for an EV myself, a PHEV, and it's very difficult when you're living in high density housing, such as an apartment with a common garage, to have an extension cord to charge your vehicle, and it can discourage adoption of EVs. So I was happy to see that. And then I just was hoping, Director McLaughlin, if you or Mr. Bielbach could comment on will the code impacts have any impact on ADA accessibility in new construction? Because that's an issue we often hear about at council as well.
I mean, I can anecdotally answer on behalf of Leif, and Leif, you can chime in, but as a common practice with code development, you make sure that the code that you're developing is not inconsistent with other codes. And so my answer is that would likely have been done at the federal level before the codes were transferred down to the state and then subsequently to cities. So the basic standard is that the codes will likely not be in conflict. So that's just a generalized response. But Leif, do you have?
Yeah, and that's my understanding as well. The accessibility codes, come from the national level, and the ANSI standards for accessibility are what we utilize as our quote unquote safe harbor, along with the IBC for commercial projects where accessibility is required. And so, yeah, those are all established at the federal level, and the state, to my knowledge, does not add much, if anything, to accessible standards, and the city just falls in line with the state.
Okay, so a lot of the non-compliance with ADA accessibility seems to be from old construction. But is there anything that we could do in the code with renovations, retrofitting, and new construction to kind of incentivize compliance more to increase accessibility? Or do you think that's just not something that's in line in the purview of what we can do in the city?
The code for existing buildings does contain provisions, requirements for updating existing buildings towards fuller compliance with accessibility. There are limitations, some financial, some technically feasible thresholds. And so it's not silent to that. It depends on the nature and extent of the upgrades to the building, what you're doing. And there are percentages of your construction budget that you may, under many circumstances, have to increase your construction budget to increase the compliance with the accessibility standards. So there are requirements for existing buildings. We have not considered increasing those at the city level. But we could certainly have that discussion and see if there are opportunities that make sense.
I think at that point, it might make sense for us to have a public hearing targeted at accessibility and to give an opportunity for our ADA advocates and some of the very active wheelchair users in the city who are always bringing things forward with sidewalks, et cetera, that makes it very difficult for them to live and function in our city. And so possibly in the future, that could be something we could pursue. Mr. Bierbeck, I'm happy to send you my question about 19.07.050 and 0.065 via email for follow-up, so I could not hopefully tie you up too long at this meeting, if that would work.
Well, and hopefully you can see
Yep.
that section in front of you now. And honestly, when it comes to habitat assessments, I rely on the planning department for their expertise. And so I'm not sure I'm going to do justice to myself answering your question.
Okay, I can forward my question to you and Director McLaughlin. And
yes, and we'll make sure that we put our heads together and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking my questions, especially since it was first impression.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and pass the buck to Councilmember Butchness.
Thanks. I'll be really quick because I think we know that you're not going to be, you really don't know the answers for the WUI or the International Wildlife Urban Interface Code. But some questions I have is I think the Shoreline Master Program may have to be updated as well, which, well, we should have all of these codes updated, critical areas and that. But wouldn't you think that we should have a public hearing when it comes to this particular section of the code? Because I know in the past, again, you've done a great job all these years updating the code to international standards, but don't you think important topics, because Jenna also had important topics that deal with our environment, that we should have a public hearing and maybe pull that section out once we get the data?
Hold this. If I can just address this in briefly, twofold is the Title 19 doesn't require a public hearing, nor has it traditionally ever gone through planning board. We actually did go above and beyond this year, I would say, to host a public forum through the Green Building Forum to see if there was any public interest. Not really a huge surprise that there wasn't, right? People at this level, until it really affects their development, would they actually get really in the weeds of this material. But again, we've done our best. We've also gone to the Climate Protection Committee and tried to get feedback on some of the optional appendices and did actually get good feedback on that. So again, it's this is the state mandated codes or sorry, at the federal to the state to the local jurisdictions, they're not super malleable. And so, you know, there's not a lot of bandwidth to change, with the exception of the optional appendices that we mentioned.
Oh, I understood everything you said. I'm not disagreeing with you. What I am saying is that there's still some nebulous, or there's still some information out there that has not been known yet. So yeah, we have to approve this, and we have approved it the last 3 years, every year for as long as I've been on council. But I'm just saying, for the aspects that deal with the critical areas, shoreline master program, and perhaps, well, anything relating to wildlife information, that we might want to try and make sure that those two are married to the fact that then you have your public hearing, because you're still going to have your public hearing when it comes to critical areas. You're going to have a public hearing.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying.
That's what I'm trying to get at. That's
yeah,
all.
yeah. It's a sequence. So really, it's a sequencing issue or opportunity. And Leif and I talked about that earlier, and exactly what you're saying, that, you know, the WUI is going to have not domino, that's a bad reference, but it's going to have implication on other policies, you know, codes and practices, quite frankly. And so we are, over these next few weeks, going to get a handle on exactly what it touches upon specifically, and be able to speak to that, you know, more specifically at the council meeting. So agreed that at some point in the future, like the critical area code or the tree code, all of that will absolutely require a public hearing when we go to change all that.
And I might add that we have a lot of work to do between now and the end of October to advertise, you know, the changes coming out. So we'll be populating the website and other resources to provide some education as to what's coming your way to the public and the developers. And yeah, so the WUI code is one of the biggies that we will be getting out in front of folks, hopefully.
Okay, great. And we have Neil, and I'm just going to make everybody aware that we're going to have to be a little quicker on this item and all of our subsequent items so that we're actually done before the Finance Committee meeting starts. Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have one question. It relates to sequencing. I learned a little bit more about this, but from what I understand, we essentially adopt the codes that are provided for us for the building code, and then the optional appendices are ones that we choose for our city. Is there any discussion about those appendices that we add, or is that something that let's say the administration decides?
No, this completely, this is a council action. The decision as to incorporate the appendices or not. So they're optional. So okay. I will say, and I hopefully, you know, in the agenda memo and in Leif's presentation, this, it really does, the optional appendices are actions in the climate action plan. So the climate action plan speaks to improving waste diversion as part of construction, speaks to allowances for solar energy and new developments. And oh goodness, Leif, was there a third? No.
I'm sorry, I can't help you at the moment.
I think those are the two. Okay.
Yeah, that's helpful. We've already pre-digested some of these decisions. And essentially, any of the international codes that come to us are adopted, because those are the building codes that everyone and every city adopts, and then you'll bring those appendices back to us as for council decision. From a scheduling standpoint, do you expect that sometime in October?
So I mean, the Title 19 package will come as a whole to council, right. You know, so the optional as well as all of the Title 19 updates as it was packaged for committee tonight. Leif, you know, and in the agenda memo, it says by the end of October. Do you have the exact date, Leif?
October 29th, they take effect.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm thinking that we can send this to the consent agenda. Does everybody find that agreeable?
I do.
It sounds like it's coming back to our council meeting at a future scheduled date. So
do you feel the need for that, Director McLaughlin and Leif? Mr. Bjerbeck? Do you feel the need for it to come to full council rather than consent?
Well, we were hopeful that maybe we could put it on the agenda in 2 weeks from now, which gives us time to revisit a couple of things that we've had last minute head scratching on. And so that would be our proposal. There may be some minor tweaks. I'm hopeful that they're all in the minor category, that they would fall under a consent umbrella.
Yeah.
We're probably going to need at least a couple of weeks.
Okay, and if you want it to go on consent and there are changes from what we're seeing today and talking about today, you can send it in an email to Councilmember Nand and I with those tracked changes. And we can pre-approve it for going on consent or to say that we think it should be full council at that point. But I'm expecting that it should be a fine on consent.
That sounds very fair. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next item. It is 3, which is the update on city recruitments. Do we have maybe Ms. Wagner? Is she the one who's coming today on behalf of HR?
I see her in the room.
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. You want to share what's in there? That would be great. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, I'm not exact. Did you want me to read through the list?
Yeah.
Or did anybody have any questions?
Basically, we just are trying to stay on top of where we are from a staffing standpoint. I know that there have been some, sort of long-term vacancies, and we were just trying to stay on top of it, which is the reason for this agenda memo and topics. So,
Okay. Well, I mean, I can speak to maybe some of the longer term postings that are on here. First of all, in the HR department, we have our manager and our assistant moving along nicely. We are working through, we actually just finished references for our assistant, so we'll be moving forward in that process. And then follow-up interviews are scheduled for the manager position. So those are moving along nicely. I would anticipate being able to close those out within the next 3 to 4 weeks, having somebody hired. The administrative assistant position in the administrative services department has been a tough position to fill. We did have a candidate with a verbal offer. I'm not sure that they've responded to that. So we may actually be kind of moving backwards on that one, having to go back into the applicant pool, unfortunately. The seasonal parks maintenance labor position, that one was recently actually closed on the website, but we are working through the background check process with a candidate. And the reason for that is because we had a seasonal employee who was actually hired into one of the full-time maintenance worker positions. So that's awesome, but it created a backfill. So we had to work and backfill the remainder of his seasonal position. Looks like the water maintenance worker, they have another vacancy opening up, so they just opted to keep that position open instead of starting a new recruitment. And yeah, capital projects manager and the street maintenance labor, the department's reviewing those applications. The fleet mechanic that was recently posted internally didn't receive any applicants, but the hiring manager is working with the second top candidate from the last round, which occurred this year, on offering that job to them. So that one is moving along nicely. And then the plans examiner and the planner position are both, the applications are going to be reviewed by the departments either looks like today or in a couple weeks. And then police, I can't really speak to, and I think Jessica indicated nobody from police would be here, but that list is also included in the agenda packet. If you had any specific questions, I can certainly try to address those.
Right. For the purposes of the public listening, I just wanted to let them know that there's been 5 hires in the police department in 2023. 3 more candidates are set for hire on the 16th. 1 more candidate is at the conditional offer stage. They're anticipating an October 1st hire, and that it is a continuous process. There are currently 12 vacancies that we're looking to fill. So it's been an ongoing process trying to recruit and keep our police force. So if anybody doesn't have any questions, I think we're brought up to speed. The domestic violence one was filled, right? Here it is. The DV coordinator.
It looks like it's in. It looks like it might still be in background, but the anticipated start date is November 1st.
Yeah, if that is successful. So we're eager to have that one filled. So okay.
Yeah, that was the only question I had because of the impact on the prosecutor's work. But glad to hear that one's moving along.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, of course. You're very welcome.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the ordinance regarding the shopping carts. And I have to apologize. I had asked for this update and then hadn't read it when it was coming through going to the agenda. And the content is a little bit more expansive than what I had asked for and expected. So if you got any communications from me that are not in alignment with what is in front of you, that's why, because I had a different impression about what was coming forward. So basically what we were trying to do is move forward some of the stuff that we could move forward easily. And looking at the draft ordinance starting on page 190, it looked like all of those sections that are cited at the top, except for the last one, would still be sections that could be in this regulation with the information that we have now and the support that we have now. On that purpose, it would be modified so it was only the first sentence, which says the primary purpose of this chapter at this point is to require the retail establishments in the city of Edmonds to permanently affix identification signage to their shopping carts. So we would drop that second sentence that came after that talked about making it a misdemeanor, because we're not ready for that yet. And then definitions would stay, exemptions would stay. And then the next thing under 5.45 on the required shopping cart signage, we would drop the part about enforcement at this point, but to get the word out and start communicating to the stakeholders what that required shopping cart signage is so that they could start putting that in place. That is a requirement for any misdemeanor that's already state law to be pursued down the road, is for them to be identified as being, owner owned and with these sort of notifications to the public on that. And then we would take off that 050, which is about the unlawful removal or possession of shopping carts, because we're just not ready for that yet on the administration side. So anyway, if we could discuss that approach and suggestion in the agenda memo instead of what was actually given to you. And I apologize again for that oversight on my part.
So Vivian, first of all, thank you for your work on this, and thank you for your willingness to take feedback and make changes to the proposed ordinance. I still have quite a number of questions and concerns, specifically towards the regulation of the retail businesses, which are largely going to be grocery stores, and not understanding what the impacts of applying this regulation to their business model will be. Grocery stores operate on a very thin margin, especially bargain grocery stores like Winco, which we have operating in our city limits. And I think that we should have a better understanding of the financial impacts to them, which they will then pass on to their consumers. And they are providing a vital service by selling food in our city, in our jurisdiction, before we attempt to regulate them in this manner. So that would be my feedback. I don't think this is ready to go to full council yet.
Okay, well, just wanted to make sure that you're understanding that there is no penalty, that we're just kind of saying, oh, we're required to have this shopping cart signage, but it's not even having any enforcement or timing in that yet, but just kind of start getting that word out there. This is not having a financial impact, except saying, you know, you might want to start getting your ducks in a row, because at some point that will be coming. Do you still feel that way with it not having any deadlines or penalties?
Yes, and I think it goes back to my philosophical objections towards penalizing either criminally or financially the victims of a crime. The shopping cart owners, the retail businesses, and the grocery stores in this context are the victim of a crime. And so before we regulate their behavior and apply a financial penalty to them because they are the victims of this phenomenon, I'd like to have a greater understanding of, first of all, maybe this, you know, I'm just mentally ticking through the grocery stores in town. And I think at the very least on their handles, they do identify the owner of the shopping carts. So then I have questions about the size of the signage. If they have to affix something after the carts have been created, how much will that cost? And, you know, I just think that we have to tread carefully, especially when regulating the victims of a crime and businesses who are providing a vital service to our community.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that this is not attached to a crime of them being stolen. It's the notification that has to be on the card in order for an existing state law to be able to ever be enforced. And I do not believe that they have to have their names on the carts currently. I've actually seen some when I've been trying to return them that don't have the names on the carts. So this would be something that's like an aftermarket little affixing, and it's all laid out in the RCW. It has to be there in order to be able to enforce any kind of a misdemeanor crime, which we're not saying we're going to do at this stage with what's being proposed right now.
So I would like to see the language of the RCW possibly included in a narrative, and then also I really do think that we need to interface with the stakeholders directly before attempting to pass this, because I just think also we just need to understand what they're already doing to try to prevent shopping cart theft, because I know that Safeway has a new like anti-theft measure in which the wheels will lock if the shopping cart is moved off of their premises. I know that the Dollar Tree has those large metal poles that prevent their shopping carts from being wheeled outside of their store. So, you know, I think that my preference would be that we approach the retail businesses in a more collaborative manner, and that, you know, this is a phenomenon we're seeing in our jurisdiction, and we understand that this is harming your business model. We have a public cleanliness / public safety interest in, you know, helping to protect your shopping carts and approaching this in a more collaborative way. So I appreciate all of your hard work on this. I was just, until we can get that sort of feedback from the retail businesses themselves, I prefer that we not move forward with this too precipitously.
Yeah, and I am glad that you brought that up, Jenna, because you see in the I don't know, either the background history or the narrative, we were thinking that stakeholder involvement and conversation was one of the other things that we could be getting moved forward. I did talk to the members, leadership members of the EDC, and they are, you know, open to bringing it to the commission to see if they are, you know, have the bandwidth and the ability and willingness to go forward on that. And if they were, then we could bring it back as an either a consent item or a for discussion item at council, whether or not we want to task them and ask them to do that. So that that's sort of being moved forward. But I agree with you. I think that we do want them to feel like they're partners with us in trying to solve this problem that we have.
Thank you. And thank you for your willingness to take my feedback on that respect. So I was hoping until we get those comments, and I think it's great that the EDC has an interest. I was thinking maybe you and me can just call up the 4 grocery stores in Edmonds and see if we can talk to anybody who makes managerial decisions in their chain of command and get feedback on this proposed ordinance before we move forward. Would you be okay with us doing that before we attempt to bring it before full council?
Yeah, I think we let's see what if the EDC doesn't want to take it on. I love it that we can just jump in, the 2 of us. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, Councilmember Tibbet. Oh, you're still muted.
I do think it'd be great to bring it to the EDC and invite a whole host of businesses to participate in giving us feedback. It'd be both public, and it would be a way for them to collaborate also on for the variety of issues that they face with this regard. So I would hope that it would be a public forum as well as just a part of an EDC meeting. And
great idea.
And in terms of labeling, most carts that I've seen would have let's say possibly the store name on the cart, but none of the information that indicates where it came from, what the address is, and the fact that it was removed without permission. And I think that the language here in the proposed ordinance is really clear as to what they would put on there in addition to just the name of the store. And I don't see that as being particularly onerous for any of the companies that do this. So I'm in favor of this ordinance, and I think it's a simple way to notify the public that unauthorized removal of carts is not allowed, and then at some point it'll make sense to enforce that. So those are my comments.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what I'm hearing is that Jenna, you'd be against doing this at this point. So if we were doing it, that it would have to be to full council and not anything that was being recommended entirely by committee. But if we can get things to move quickly, with the EDC and the outreach to the stakeholders, I'd be okay with waiting. I just am really eager for something to be happening.
I would have a lot more comfort in this regard if we could get the feedback from the stakeholders. Just because, it's the margins are very thin in our area. Retailers are facing a lot of pressure from shoplifting, from labor. And, I would just like to understand how this would impact their businesses and how they would perceive it. Would they perceive this as something that's attempting to help them because they are actually the victims of a crime? Or would they perceive it as they are being blamed for the phenomenon of, stray carts being found willy-nilly? And so that's why I think it's important to try to solicit feedback from stakeholders, especially who are providing vital services to our community and bringing food into our community, before we just kind of put this ordinance out there.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be working to move that forward then and get that feedback.
Thank you. I really appreciate your openness to my feedback.
You bet. Okay, so the next item is the adult exchange application process. This is item 5, being referred to the Sister City Commission. And this was a council item, so I'll go ahead and just read the agenda memo. The Sister City Commissions established by the City Council, codified in ECC 10.60, which was attached in the packet. It's the mission of the commission to promote international communication and understanding through exchanges of people, ideas, and culture. Edmonds and the city of Heikin, Japan established a relationship on April 5th, 1988. And the two cities celebrated their 35th anniversary this year. And I know firsthand just from the, incoming exchange that, this is something that has been enjoyed by a lot of people. The Edmonds Sister City hosts 3 exchange programs. 2 are reciprocal student exchanges. Students from Japan visit Edmonds. Edmonds students visit Japan. And an adult anniversary exchange, which happens just every 5 years. So the recommendation is to approve a motion to refer the item to the Sister City Commission to establish a process for the adult anniversary exchange that will ensure that there's ample public notification somewhere along the lines of what we do for filling board and commission positions, and that there's a fair and equitable application process for Edmonds residents to be able to participate in that event. So Jen, I see your hand is up already if you wanted to go first.
Oh, apologies. I have no idea why my hand was up. I'm in complete agreement with the recommendation, and I think we should put it on to consent. So.
Okay, great. Anybody else have anything? Diane, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think we're rushing to put this through to consent. Oh, I am not off of mute. Part of this is codified and part of this is not codified. And so the issue that you're bringing up is not codified. So I would think that we would want to codify it in order to achieve what you're attempting to state in the memo. And again, I'm a little confused with how this agenda memo came forth, but to me, you can't change program and require changes without having it codified. Or maybe
I think we were looking for recommendations from the Sister City Commission themselves as to what should be codified. And obviously in the end, council would be the party that would be codifying it. But to kind of put the commission in charge of coming up with that process that we would be using. So then at least proposing to us what they think we should be considering.
So then rather than sending it to consent, sending it back to the Sister City Commission to figure out what should be codified, correct?
Right. But I think when we're sending something to a commission, it has to come from full council. So I think what Councilmember Nand was saying is that we would be putting it on consent, that we're referring it to the Sister City Commission to come up with some suggestions for us about what we should codify in that regard.
Okay, because we used to do things, we used to have it come from the Sister City to the committee, then to the council. So I can see what you're saying. So you just will say that you're going to recommend it go to the Sister City and codify it. Okay, then the next question I have, and I brought this up with Jeff because it is codified. And I don't know about you, but I received a lot of questions from citizens regarding the expenditure and the financial procedures related to that for 1060 050. And a lot of it dealt with what is considered a gift of public funds and what is considered normal course of someone's job. So I know in the past that all mayors were allowed to, I don't know if all I know is all mayors in the past have never used city funds to go to such an event, which I don't think I don't know if that's A-okay or not okay, because actually that's part of the mayor's job is to promote our city. So I don't have an issue with that, but I do have it. Well, I don't really have an issue. I know many citizens have an issue when an employee of the city attends this anniversary exchange, and is that considered a gift of public funds when that person's job description doesn't require that type of attendance. So I did send that email out to Jeff, and I don't know if he's on or not, but that is the question that I have been asked by many folks. And I know we're a little bit delayed on all of this because we have been waiting for this presentation to come forth about how things went. But that's one question I have, because, a gift of public funds is a pretty citizens can get overly concerned about that. And I don't even know how much the ticket was, so I don't know any of these facts other than that was a question asked of me to ask you guys.
So for starters, can we have Jeff Taraday come in from the attendees list? And also, I think Councilmember Nan must have fallen off of Wi-Fi and then needs to be re-promoted as a panelist as well. So I'll have, when Jeff gets in here, we'll have him answer your question, Diane, and then we'll go to Susan. I see your hand too.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You heard what I said, so I don't have to repeat, correct?
You do not have to repeat.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I can answer the question at a really high level, I suppose, which is that, job descriptions are not specific enough to describe in detail every authorized travel that a particular employee might undertake as part of their job with the city. So like to look to the job description as the source for whether a particular trip was authorized or not authorized would be, I think, the wrong place to look, because, it's just not possible to have the foresight when drafting a job description to be able to identify each and every trip that an employee might be asked to take as part of their job. So that's, I guess, the first comment I would make. I believe the city has personnel policies that speak to travel and reimbursement for travel and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, the personnel policies essentially, they don't go into a lot of detail with respect to, which trips are authorized, which trips are not authorized, but they just basically state that authorized trips will be paid for by the city. And so that then leads to the logical question of, well, how does a trip get authorized? And I would assume that a trip gets authorized by one supervisor. So if we're talking about a trip taken by a director, then that supervisor is the mayor. And if the mayor has authorized that trip, then under the personnel policies as they're drafted, then I would assume that that's an expense that the employee would not need to incur out of pocket.
Good. And I think that the policies are coming through in the next set on the finance committee meetings. I guess the question I have, though, is some citizens would not, and again, I'm just, as I read this from a financial standpoint, and the fact about the spirit of the intent of this anniversary exchange, of which I've been part of 3 of them. And it's like, it's really council member and mayor and, things of that nature. So to me, we have never seen folks, employees be part of that type of anniversary type of thing. So that's all I'm just saying from the spirit of thing. And since it's in the code, I'm just trying to make citizens understand why this is treated differently, because this seems to be more of a celebratory thing where we exchange gifts and we exchange, it's a big deal. You've seen 3 of them, I think, or 2, or been part of 2 of them. So it is kind of a big deal. So that's, I guess, the question I have is, why wouldn't we want to differentiate in this particular, because I've donated to the Sister City Fund many times. So should we want to differentiate into this particular code those aspects, or should we say refer to the personnel code or something to that effect? I just don't want the Sister City Commission to be penalized for what people are perceiving to be something that is not codified correctly, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, well, let me let me try and respond, and then you can let me know if I gathered the thrust of your question. But I think with respect to what you want to happen in the future, if the council feels that there should be additional clarity brought to either how these anniversary trips function, or additional clarity brought to the city's policies for travel reimbursement for employees. I mean, those are all things that the city council can look at and consider and amend if necessary. And I don't necessarily have a policy recommendation one way or the other with respect to what those future policies should look like, but certainly it's within the council's purview to have those policies look the way you want them to look. And so, if the council has concerns about, these types of issues and wants to revisit those questions, then, it's within the council's power to do that.
Okay, good. And then I'm sorry, Sin, I know you have a question and we're running out of time. Okay, so then Vivian, so like I would like to make a couple of amendments specifically to such of this thing, the adult anniversary exchange. Are we going to wait, or are we going to try to provide some of these examples that we have been given by citizens or comments? Do you want us to supply that to the Sister City Commission, or how do you want this to be pursued or handled? Because I do think that the adult anniversary exchange should be codified to ensure that all council members and citizens are invited. Because to me, I was going to go this year and I promised people I was going to go, and I was never even invited. And you already know, Roger Pence had the same feeling. So how do you want to handle this where we see some real loopholes, or how do you want this handled? I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I think maybe we can just add a little bit more explicitness to the agenda memo when we have it approved on consent, that just kind of elaborates on the specifics of notification and application for that adult exchange, that we're looking for, a way of ensuring that there's, robust notification and a fair application and an interview process or whatever for the people to be considered for that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Payne.
Thank you. Are you sure you don't want to have Jenna go?
Yeah, that would be great if you're willing to wait. Thank you.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jen.
Go ahead, Jenna.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Susan. I just wanted to comment on Councilmember Buckness's recommendation. And I think that we should kind of separate the two issues of a public process for application to be part of the City Sister Commission from the separate issue of use of taxpayer funds for travel reimbursement. Because I think that those are two areas that can be regulated separately. And I would like us to get more feedback from the city administration and staff right now regarding guidelines on the use of public funds, and therefore, hopefully have it just viewed in a more methodical, neutral fashion, and so that everyone has clarity on the issue. That would be my preference.
Susan?
Okay, thank you. When I saw this, I thought it was just interesting. As someone who has traveled on a group travel into Japan, it's separate from the city. I had a lot of sort of interest in this topic. So I'm hoping that we will send a memo with some outline of what we're hoping that the sister city will include in their analysis. And some of that is going to, I hope, include, because we had someone who was assigned to us who was a native speaker and a good tour guide. And so we were able as a family group to be able to travel around and get our needs met. So I'm hoping that there's some look at, what is a manageable size group? Because if you have 10 people who are able to go and nobody else speaks Japanese, it could be really problematic. So if we're going to have this analysis, I want them to all, to decide is like, so how big is the group? And does that vary from year to year? And so, and is it council members? Do council members kind of outrank citizens and residents, or should it be an equal mix of, make it proportional? If six tourists, can, go for the anniversary trip, how do you break that out? And so I think this is a good ask. I know that in foreign travel, I think all of us have had a chance to maybe, leave the country. It's also really important to remember that you are an ambassador of one kind or another. And so there's no way to really regulate decorum, but it is, so how would someone be assessed if there was a list of 20, but only 10 could go? How, have them kind of prioritize how that would work, because I think that that's also going to need to be evaluated, and it needs to be fairly weighted. And decorum's only one thing that comes to mind, because we don't want to cause an international incident either. But so those are some of the things that I'm thinking about with this one. Can we add those items to the whatever we send over to the Sister City Commission?
I think those were great additions. Does everybody else agree? Jenna?
I agree. And I would like to, maybe we can include this somehow in the narrative. I think it would be great if we could have a broader range through this publication and equitable access framework that we're trying to pursue with all of our boards and commissions, is to try to have a broader range of socioeconomic and geographic diversity in the people who apply for this commission, and just have the Sister City Commission be mindful of that as well. And potentially publishing the opportunity in multiple languages as the administration has adopted as a policy. And because it seems like this is just something like, until I joined council, I had never heard of. And I bet there's a lot of people in my generation similarly situated who just weren't aware that the city was doing this. Yeah, so that would be my feedback. But I like Susan's points and Diane's as well.
Yeah, and I especially like what Councilmember Payne said about the what should that mix be? Because if you do have 10 people, then maybe 2 or 3 of them are council members, and 2 or 3 of them are residents at large, and maybe we do want to have one staff member go, and as long as they're paying their own way, all those people. I don't think that would be a bad thing for us to even, ask for and want to have a mix like that. And,
right.
And that helps you score down from the 20 to the 10 that get to go, if it is 10.
I just want to be really clear about the point of understanding that, because unless you're fluent in Japanese, and maybe those people can get a pass, it is a huge burden to have. You understand? So it's like it might be 10 people one year, it might be 20 the next, if there's better translation services.
Yeah, that's a great point. And of course, we have to make sure that we're prioritizing the people who are on the Sister City Commission, who are doing the work for that program all the time. Obviously, they should get some precedence and priority. Councilmember Butchins, do you have something else?
Yeah, I just want to clarify a little bit as to what's happened in the past. Generally, because of the cost associated and everybody had to pay their own dime, there hasn't been many folks. In fact, I was going to be probably the first council member in 10 years that would have gone over, just because of timing. It's like timing and all of that stuff. And in the past, I know that there's been at most, I think, 6 or 7 that have gone over. That have, again, we haven't seen the presentation. I don't know how many went over this time around, but you don't get a lot of people going over because of the fact it is, you know, a really condensed. And if you talk to former Mayor Erling or Hawkinson, it's an extremely condensed thing that they do, and a lot of people just can't afford it or whatever. But I agree with Susan. But as we know, as time goes on, more and more people are learning English. So that's what we also need to consider. And then also the majority of larger delegations are when the students come over. Because the students come over and you really do see like maybe 18 and 20, but most of them already speak English. So that's just what I know from a historical standpoint.
Okay. So I think we're, oh, go ahead.
One last quick comment, and that's maybe suggest that prioritization goes to people who are host families as well. That's the last one.
Okay, it's another good thought. Okay, and then I did want to ask you what you thought about separating out that issue of, you know, when we would consider using city funds. You know, is that something that we're willing to do for the mayor? And, you know, to be specific either in this code or another code. I don't think that that's something that we send to the Sister City Commission. I think that's something that we deal with as a council. Do you guys agree?
I agree. I think we need feedback on internal policies from the administration, and then we can work on this in a way that's hopefully collaborative.
Okay, sounds good. That is what we will do from moving forward on that. Okay, so that brings us to our last topic, which is one of the reasons why we had wanted the city attorney to be here, but he was helpful on this last one as well. The resolution, or actually this is just a discussion today about the topic of the SEIS for the Highway 99 planned area, planned action ordinance that had been put in place in 2017, along with the others for the sub area, 4079, and what that pertained to, and just have this opportunity for discussion with City Attorney Terday and everybody who's been following this issue who might be on this call. So,
you want me to?
Yeah, Diane, do you want to start it off?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Vivian and Dave and Teresa Hollis and Natalie Seitz and Judy Gladstone and Glenn Douglas for this tremendous amount of work we did in like a 10-day period. There is a wonderful whole complete packet with all the ordinance that was dated October 18th, 2022 that didn't make it to the packet. So I'll just try and give you a high level 411 on it. There were 3 ordinances. The third one, which is 4079, dealt with just this planned area here. And it's called the Gateway District, the International District, and then the Hospital District. And what it did was, Jeff, do you want to just define it from a legalese term, or do you want me to just sort of do the layman's term?
Well, I mean, let's not tag team it. I mean, I'll if you want me to.
Why don't you, since you wrote these ordinances, why don't you go ahead and do the legally part of it?
All right. So 4077 adopted a sub area plan. And the sub-area plan is essentially an element of the city's comprehensive plan. So it's got the same sort of regulatory effect that a comprehensive plan has, in the sense that it is not in and of itself a development regulation. So just high-level review of how zoning works. You've got the comprehensive plan up here, which is mostly policies and goals. And then underneath that, you have development regulations or your zoning code or the ECDC, however you want to think of it. And these two things have to be consistent with one another, but it's the code that regulates for the most part, and it's the plan that does the policies and goals. So 4077 is that higher one, the policy and goal, and 4078 is the regulation. And in most parts of the city, that would be all that you have. Is you've got your comprehensive plan policies, and you've got your zoning code or your development code. In the Highway 99 sub area, there's a third piece of it, which is the planned action piece, right? And that's where 4079 comes in. 4079 is the planned action ordinance. And 4079 essentially says that for various types of development that were anticipated and analyzed in the EIS, that those types of development that were sort of foreseen and analyzed, those developments basically get to skip the SEPA process. And the theory under a planned action ordinance is that if you've done a good job of anticipating the development and you've done a good job of identifying the impacts of that development and you've done a good job of mitigating the anticipated impacts of the development, if all of those things are true, the theory is that you shouldn't really need a SEPA process, and that the SEPA process is essentially just an added layer of time-consuming regulatory burden that can be dispensed with. And so that's the theory behind 4079, the planned action ordinance. Now, obviously, reasonable minds can differ over whether the impacts were properly identified or whether the impacts were properly mitigated, and that might be, you know, where the council might want to have some discussion. But that's essentially how those three ordinances work together. So 4077 is the high level policy and goal. 4078 is the zoning code and the development regulations, and then 4079 is the planned action ordinance, which the effect of which is to essentially exempt that development in that area from SEPA review. And so you might ask, well, why does it matter whether somebody is exempt from SEPA review? Well, it matters because when a project is a planned action project, the city does not have the opportunity to do additional SEPA review on that project and then further mitigate that project with SEPA conditions. Now, there may be other conditions that get applied through the implementation of the development code by the planners, but in terms of using SEPA can be used to mitigate environmental impact, right? On a project by project basis, it can be used to mitigate environmental impact. Now, it's important to understand, though, that it's pretty unusual for small projects to have SEPA mitigation imposed on them. And the reason for that is that because small projects are small, they don't have enough impact to sort of register on the scale and justify their own sort of standalone mitigation measure. In a really large project, on the other hand, SEPA can be a very powerful tool because you can say, well, hey, you're building, 500 new units of housing, and these 500 new units of housing are going to have these impacts, and we don't think these impacts need to be mitigated, and so we are now going to impose this mitigation as a condition of development. That's what would happen in the absence of the planned action ordinance. Questions on that sort of summary?
So then, thank you, Jeff. So as you can hear, and this was one of the first for city council to encounter. And so I went back and I read all of the notes. And the reason why this was so unique, again, was what Jeff said, was it provided a citywide EIS just for that one area that I showed you, this planned area, which is very concentrated. So then what happened as part of 4079 is it does say that it should be reviewed every 5 years. And many of you were on council when it came back for review in 2020, let's see, August 20, in June of 2022. And we pulled it from the request for filing and we asked for a supplemental supplemental EIS, which means you're taking the planned action ordinance EIS for that area and you're updating it. And I just want to again say that if you were to read the minutes, many council members back in 2017 were concerned about we didn't have good development codes, we didn't have good multifamily codes, we didn't have good enforcement and things of that nature. And so I have read all that. So trust me, I can tell you. So we were all concerned because this was like a big deal for Highway 99. And the fact that these developers would get this, pre-check TSA pre-check list, just like going through TSA. So the council president did ask me to provide information as to what we felt, or what citizens and I had, and all of us, Vivian and Dave, have been working on, what we were to come up with, why we thought that the SEIS should be achieved. And then we also put $250,000 into the city budget to have it done. So we did, if you look at page 26 or page 235 of your packet, it does bring up quite a few informational things as to what were assumptions that did not happen, because in the initial planned action ordinance, it says things like, well, you need to have good code, you need to have this and that, which I'm repeating myself. But another important thing to remember is they had 9 different zones within that area, and they pretty much consolidated it all to the CG zone, which kind of is like 7 stories. So that's, and if you look at this map, I mean, this could be one of the reasons why we're getting, kind of like folks having concern about these large buildings right across the street from them, which to me would be another reason why we would want to revisit the environmental impact statement associated with this 2017 one. So that's why I'm here tonight, is that I did create an ordinance. In the ordinance, I brought up the fact that, and again, this is for discussion only, that we could, as a team, transfer that money to the city council and have the city council handle the SEIS, because we know that the administration is pretty much very busy now with staffing and things of that nature. And of course, we haven't yet checked with the council president we know things are really going to be coming up with the budget. But again, that was just an option to be brought up to get the SEIS done sooner rather than later, because the administration indicated that would happen in 2025, which in my opinion, there are 700 units on the pipeline. And that would be important for us to get the SEIS done sooner rather than later. So that was one of the options. Another option, of course, would be to totally just repeal it. And to repeal it, that means that everything goes back to just having each of these large developments do a complete SEPA process review. And in my opinion, this might be the best option because of the fact of timing, staffing, budgetary money, and all that, and that council can always go back to this planned action ordinance in the future after this SEIS has occurred in the area, if it ever is going to occur. So those were some of the options that I brought up. I do think, though, that it's very important. We've heard a lot from citizens that they do need it. It's pretty, if you think about it, the city of Edmonds has changed drastically in that area. We used to have like 23 units that came online for the last 20 years. And now we're seeing, we're going up to 600, 700. So there's a tremendous amount of change. There's a tremendous amount of issue in terms of air pollution, noise pollution, congestion, which are all part of the EIS, as well as our aquifer, which the aquifer finally is going to, code is going to come into place. But the packet's pretty complete. And like I said, if we get this to council, I'll make sure that the actual, the whole Bible or the whole story that of the every sequence that Jeff described is all in one packet that Kernan did. So then you can look at the original EIS and you can look at the specific ordinances that Jeff talked about. And then you can also think, you know, consider what should we do. And like I said, if you want to have a public hearing, we could have a public hearing. But I just think it's important that we, as council, honor that. You know, we actually said in 2022, hey, citizens of Highway 99, we will take care of this for you, because I'm concerned. I mean, we can't be putting everything on Highway 99 until we find out how it's going to impact the environment. And to do that, we need to have an update of that EIS. So does anyone have any questions on that?
I see that Jenna's got her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing these issues forward, Councilmember Butchness. You and I both voted against approving the VIA contract, if I remember correctly, because we disagreed with the decision to not pursue SEIS for Highway 99 and to pursue a citywide EIS instead. And we were outvoted on the council. So my question is for Mr. Terry. Would approving this ordinance and pushing forward with Highway 99 SEIS put us into conflict with the scope that we agreed to in the VIA contract?
Your voice cut out for a little bit there. Can you repeat the last part?
Apologies. Would this put us into conflict with the scope that council approved for the VIA contract?
I want to actually, if you'd permit me, I'd like to zoom out and answer that question at a more broad level first, because I'm not. It probably was the short answer, but I want to like try to explain why I think it might. You got to remember, the VIA contract is for an update of the entire citywide comprehensive plan, which includes the Highway 99 area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the concern that I would have about these things happening on separate tracks is that if VIA and its subconsultants are going down the path of doing a comprehensive plan for the entire city, which, keep in mind, could involve proposed policy changes for certain neighborhoods, which may or may not include Highway 99. And on a separate track, you've got an EIS being done to analyze the current policy and code without any thought being given to whether those policies should remain in place. You could end up having these two things that are not necessarily speaking to one another. So you could have an SEIS on that analyzes existing, and then you could have another EIS that analyzes the proposed new comp plan. And it's like they're sort of ships passing in the night.
They're incongruent.
Right. And so that would be my concern about proceeding separately with the EIS. Now, I guess the one way I guess you could fix that, sort of, and I haven't really fully thought through this, so I'm not sure this is a good idea, but I'm going to throw it out there. I mean, if as I mentioned before, the 4077 is part of the comp plan, right? Now you could take that sub area and run it on a completely separate track and take that sub area out of the VIA contract. But I don't necessarily like that idea, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's almost like you're treating these things as two different cities. Like you're the city council of two different cities. City number one being the Highway 99 area, and city number two being everywhere else. And it's like if you have two different consultants, where one of them is doing the comp plan for Highway 99 and one of them is doing the comp plan for everyone else, when do they get to intersect with each other? And shouldn't there be some overarching umbrella document that really treats the entire city as one city and looks at how each neighborhood interacts with all of the other neighborhoods? I mean, so yeah, is there a way to do it? Yeah, there is. I guess I have some skepticism as to whether it would be a good idea at this point. You know, this would have made more sense if we were further removed from the comp plan update. You know, we had done an SEIS in 2020 or something, when the comp plan update was still 4 years away. It would have probably made a lot more sense at that point. But now we're engaged in the comp plan work. It is ongoing right now. And so to try to segregate out Highway 99 at this stage, I'm just not sure it makes sense.
So I had a quick question.
Well, can I just do a rebuttal a little bit about, because how I see it? I
sure.
see it. Okay, I see them as two, they are totally incongruent. One is a citywide EIS, which deals with the entire city. And you can expect the people that are citizens down on 104 will have a different health environment than citizens up on Highway 99. So we're talking a different stratosphere of what an EIS encompasses. Whereas with this specific SEIS, or the update of the 2017 EIS, yes, they are incongruent, but they could still be. What we're attempting to do is help. This is a free pass for developers. And so if we don't update this SEIS or repeal 4079, developers are still going to be able to develop under the 2017 EIS standards. And so to me, I think that you're correct. The timing could not be any simpler, and it's very complex. But I do believe that we owe the citizens of Highway 99 the fact that this document allows developers to develop without a SEPA process. And that's a pretty like I said, that's a serious thing. This was really serious back in 2017. So that's why I see them as totally incongruent and can be handled at the same time, because one's addressing the development aspect and the other's addressing the entire citywide EIS, where you can have mitigation, like the Highway 99 trees. You can have mitigation from that aspect, where we are taking the entire city to try and fix things. But that is how I see that, why they're incongruent. And that's why I think that they are necessary, or we should just repeal 4079, which Jeff also suggested, because that would be probably the easiest thing to do, because the developers then will have to follow the SEPA process.
Diane,
so
we have just 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Can you wrap what you were saying?
Oh, well, that's why I was just saying, I see them completely different than what Jeff is saying. And that, to me, if we agree, and to Jenna, the city had two consultants that had both an SEIS and an EIS, and then two that just had an EIS, and they chose the EIS consultant. So they do differentiate, that there is a differentiation between the EIS and the SEIS for the planned action area, which again gives developers a free pass. So that's why I suggest we just repeal, and then it'll be simpler for everybody Okay, I'll wrap up. Sorry.
Yeah, let's leave time for people to say what they think about what you're
Okay.
saying. Okay, Jenna, Susan, and I still have things to say, so let's try to be brief.
I just had a follow-up question for Jeff. I first of all, I wanted to thank Councilmember Buckness and the group that she's been working with for trying to bring these concerns forward. I think that the blanket up zone without mitigation has been very upsetting for a lot of the community activists and citizens up here on Highway 99. I'm up in my house in Highway 99 right now. My follow-up question was in regards to the scope of the VIA contract. Do we still have maneuverability in the part of the scope that pertains to the Highway 99 to incorporate some of these concerns and some of this study as part of the citywide EIS to whether we should try to distribute density to other parts of the community, adopt mitigation steps for the CG zone, that sort of thing, to try to address the concerns of this group that Councilmember Buckness has been working with within the terms of the citywide EIS.
Well, I will remind you that there was extra public engagement with that neighborhood as part of the VIA contract, specifically for that reason, to try to address the concerns about the environmental impacts.
Well, the reason why I'm asking Mr. Terrett is because I was attempting to have this discussion with Mr. Leviton and Director McLaughlin when we were debating the contract, and they had just said that there were certain terms that hadn't been negotiated out or dealt with in terms of what we were actually paying VIA to do.
Yeah, and I'm not prepared to speak to whether a particular aspect of the work is already covered or whether it would require a scope amendment that would cost additional money. Like that would take some time for me to evaluate, and I would need to know really specifically what it was that the council might want to add to the scope, or what it is that the council wanted to confirm was in the scope. But let's just remember, at a high level, the VIA contract is covering the entire city comp plan update, which includes the Highway 99 area. And so if there are concerns about policies and goals and policies in the Highway 99 area, it would be my assumption that those would get evaluated as part of the VIA work to determine whether, when we do a new comp plan update, I'm not assuming that any part of the city is going to have exactly the same goals and policies as before. Like, why would you do an update if everything was just going to stay the same? So I assume that they're going to look at that.
Thank you. So maybe this is follow-up we should do with Director McLaughlin to try to get more specificity on what VIA is planning to do, it sounds like. And hopefully we can find a good compromise position. So thank you, Mr. Terry.
Go ahead, Susan.
Thank you very much. This is a question I'll try to be, and it's kind of weighty, but it's not, but it helps me to understand a little bit more about the sort of the scope of the problem. So you had mentioned that, and I know that this is going to be probably based on your experience, but not going to be able to be specific. You had said that some of the smaller projects will not be required to do a SEPA because they're so small and there's not the environmental impact. So if we decided to get rid of, the ordinance 4079, then that would mean all of everybody's going to be responsible for their own SEPA work. And then the next thing is that I'm curious about that some of these projects are going to be smaller and fall out. How big do you have to be to kind of to reach the SEPA threshold?
Yeah, that's a great
that
question.
Is and that's the one, right?
That's a great question, and unfortunately there's no rule of thumb on that I can give you. I can't say, like, if you're above 20 units or if you're above 50 units that you're going to trigger some kind of mitigation. Fundamentally, what happens is with each project, if it's not categorically exempt, then there's going to be a threshold determination. And it's in that threshold determination where the SEPA responsible official has to evaluate the SEPA checklist and look at all of the impacts that are disclosed there, and then determine, is there an unmitigated impact?
Right.
And if there's an unmitigated impact, then we can mitigate, we can impose mitigation. But if there is no unmitigated impact, then it basically is going to get the same treatment as it gets under 4079, which is, I mean, procedurally, it's a little bit different because you still have to jump through the hoop and fill out a bunch of forms and stuff. But the result is going to be no new mitigation. You're only going to get mitigation if the SEPA checklist reveals that there is an unmitigated, significant adverse environmental impact.
That's what I was remembering. All right. So this is very helpful. And we have 15 months, 14 months before the new comp plan comes into play here. So there's some things that I guess we need to decide between now and then whatever comes from the new EIS review. So thank you very much. That's very helpful for me.
Well, I want to thank everybody for the discussion. I think it was helpful. And I, think that there's several different ways that can be gone. And one of them is to look at, units over whatever, are subject to this ordinance and or not subject to the ordinance is another way of going, instead of lifting it entirely, is to tweak it so that it's over a certain size. So more than one possible path. So we can ruminate on what got discussed. I too was somebody who had voted for the SEIS to happen. And for me, it really is just about the timing of where we are right now, thinking that based on what we were told by the Herrera consultant mostly, but also from some developer friends, what their input was about just that cross feed of information, kind of what Mr. Teraday was talking about too. Like, you're either treating them like two separate things, which as soon as he said that, I was thinking, yeah, that's the problem always when we're planning around Esperance, right? We're kind of setting ourselves up for that same challenge with the comp plan, taking that approach. So, if we have the concerns really outlined of what we're worried isn't going to get addressed in a manner where things are going to happen during this interim time, I want us to get to the point where we can identify what those concerns are and have the Director McLaughlin and the Herrera consultant discuss, why they think that we're okay with the approach that's being taken, or what they recommend we should do to make sure that we've got our bases covered in that interim phase.
The only thing I have to say is that the city has not complied to what they said they were going to do in 2017. That's why we had a moratorium on the step backs. So my issue continues to be, yes, it is timing. And yes, the comp plan is coming forward, but the city chose one to do a citywide EIS. And I just want to honor what I understand is the citizens of Highway 99 deserve an update from that 2017 EIS. And if we aren't going to do that, we should just repeal 4079, because we're giving developers a free pass for things that have not yet been mitigated. And that's been since 2017. So that's my issue. That timing issue is, to me, very critical. So I'll just leave it at that and work on it more. But that's my opinion.
Thank you, Councilmember Buckness, because this is an area of town that has traditionally been underserved. And this is the only part of Edmonds that is presently zoned CG with no mitigation.
No, correct. 9 zones were canceled.
So thank you for bringing this forward.
Okay, well, we are forced to adjourn whether or not we want to. It's 5:30 p.m. And I thank everybody for being here today and for your really good inputs on these subjects tonight. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, and we are adjourned at 5:30.
Bye.